everybody? We got episode 12 on the Koballa podcast. We are back and here for another episode for you. And today we're going to talk about the value of stories, the importance of storytelling. I realized for me that stories are very important to tell to one another. And there are many ways that people tell their stories, right? For me personally, I feel like stories are so important, and I gravitate towards stories because it's where I really connect with the character, the story, the moral of the story, the lesson that's being taught, the development of the character, the theme that's being presented. Whether that story is fictional or non-fictional, it's when a good story is told, it's pretty captivating and it gets me engaged. And so I'm a big sucker for stories. I really enjoy storytelling in all forms that it's created. I mean, stories can be told in books, blogs, movies, in person, verbally. There's so many ways that stories can be told. Shows, Netflix shows and episodes with drawing. I mean, there's so many ways that a story can be told, and it's just, to me, if you got a good story to tell, I always love to hear it. And so, why do I feel like stories are so valuable? Why they should be highly valued? Well, I'll break it down into 3 points. I think for one, it's a really good way to connect with people. I think stories are a great way for people to resonate with one another, especially stories, your own stories that you share with one another, right? Real life events that actually occurred. I think those type of stories really connect from one person to another because I think a lot of times people go through a lot of similar experiences, and when people tell their stories they could resonate with the other person and understand what they're going through in specific experiences. And so that really allows people to bond and understand other people's perspective. When you tell these stories of maybe failure and triumph and success and all that, and even talking about the highs and lows in life, those specific stories people really resonate with. They can really relate to that. And maybe there's specific instances or specific occurrences that happen with one person that the other person probably went through the same exact thing. And through that experience, through sharing that experience with one another, telling that story, people really connect with one another and build relationships and build bonds that really allow people to connect with one another. And so that's one thing. I mean, it really does bring people together when you're able to tell a story, when people are very receptive to it, and specific points in the story where the audience can relate with the storyteller and really resonate with that person, especially with real life stories that actually occurred. And I think with fictional characters or fictional stories, usually if you're the audience, you're the reader, you're the one taking in the story, you really bond with maybe specific characters because specific characters are going through those similar events that you went through in real life. And so you develop like favoritism towards certain characters because they resonate with who you are, or you could really relate with them. And so you could have that bond too, and why you gravitate towards certain stories, certain shows, or certain movies that you really like, because you really connected with the characters, you really connected with the whole plot of the story and the theme that goes along with it. And then you develop like an admiration of the creator of that story, right? Because maybe those ideas and that type of story really came from a place in real life where it made them create that story to really make a point, to create a specific theme, to convey a certain message that they want to get out there. And that would lead to my second point. I mean, the stories are made to really create like a lesson for you, to really get a point across. And you could definitely make your points. You can make your point across through just being direct, stating your arguments, stating your position in a particular argument or belief or stance on certain values or beliefs. But when you tell it in a way, in a very creative way, in a way of a story, you really like I said, you really connect to that story. That story, the point that is being made, or the position that that the author is trying to convey to the reader or the listener or the watcher, it hits them a little deeper rather than just saying it. Because you say it in a way where it's like built up through time and through a development of a plot and through characters, that you go along with the ride. You go along in that journey. They take you on this journey of the story that is made. And that's part of the appeal, and that's what really can really make the morale of the story, the lesson or the theme really stick with you, because you are so invested in that journey. They take you along for the ride. That ride really carries you and really hits deep in your soul. And you really get it that through whatever events that occur in that story, through whatever the character goes through how they develop, how they grow, or how they fall, how they succeed or triumph, whatever the case may be, however the story unfolds, it hits you that much deeper, and you really connect with the story more. And that point, the message that is being conveyed to the audience, it sticks with you more, rather than, not to say that points in positions, arguments that are made in like a debate or a conversation, not to say that that doesn't hit more, but when you put out an example, when you put out a real life instance or a story, then for some reason the point hits differently. That message hits differently, rather than you just flat out stating your position or your message. Right? At least for me, it does. At least for me, I certainly feel it. I would rather see a message conveyed through a story, through a good story, because I get captivated. I want to be on that ride. I want to see how characters develop. I want to see how the story unfolds and what happens at the end, and what the point the storyteller's trying to make. And so that's the second point. The third point that I would say the value in the story, I'm trying to get my head around it. Um maybe it'll come back to me. But I did have a third point in mind, but hopefully it'll come back as I go through this podcast. But going back to those 2 points, I mean, you really connect with the people. You create these bonds, especially in people sharing that. And I would say my third point would really build up. It'll build off of my first point in terms of kind of the effects that it has on people when people share their story. Um, I I personally like listening to a lot of interviews and podcasts and like hearing people's personal stories or specific moments in their life where maybe they're going through difficult times or maybe a lead up to like a specific event. One thing I really follow is mixed martial arts at a professional level. So things like watching like UFC or ONE FC, a lot of those big promotions in mixed martial arts that show a lot of big events. And obviously we all get invested into the bigger fights, the bigger pay-per-view fights. But what draws me into a lot of the events is the whole lead up, the story that goes along, the background history that is in place of maybe how the fighters got there or the drama that they have with one another, the whole lead up in their camp, what's going on behind the scenes as they go through training, as maybe they might have some obstacles and challenges that come along the way. Because usually the whole lead up to the fight, they have like a fight camp that they invest in for 8 to 12 weeks. Just working so hard and putting so much effort into their preparation only to prepare for the fight. So everything leads up to this climax where the climax is pretty much the fight. And we'll see the results of how a fight entails. So the whole drama, there could be a lot of trash talk. There could be a lot of bad blood where, these two individuals that are fighting, probably used to be friends, but no longer friends. And there's been a big, or not drift, but big rift in their relationship. And people are invested in that drama and people are invested in, what happened for their relationship to sever and lead up to this point where they have to fight one another. So there's all this drama, there's so much trash talk, and people are so invested into that, the story that is developing as it unfolds leading up to this fight where all that drama, all that tension that they have with one another, they could all let it out in this fight in 5 rounds of 5 minutes to see who's victorious, to see who gets the championship. It's very captivating for me, and I like listening to their interviews, or I like listening to or watching like a lot of these videos that lead up to the fight, talk about how training camp is going, inside look. There's a lot of those when it comes to these type of events. Boxing events or MMA events, big pay-per-view events, where you see multiple fighters, see their lead up, what they're doing outside of camp, how they prepare, how things they say to the things they say about one another, their opponents. And so usually the more drama it is, the more entertaining it is. Unfortunately, for some reason, people just love drama. They love seeing it. They love tension. They love hate for whatever reason. And they like to see it all unfold in a fight in a cage where these people are half naked, and it's weird. It's a weird part of our human nature that really draws us in, and I'm part of that too. I'm a big martial arts fan, and so I am invested in the event itself and the story that leads up to it. And the reason I bring up that example is because it really connects me to the fighters. It makes me like either like the fighter more or dislike him even more. Generally, I have a respect of all martial art fighters because of what they do. It's a very hard line of work, a lot of discipline, a lot of hard work, a lot of adversity that they have to face, and it's very intriguing how they prep for that and what they have to go through, their mindset, their psychology in the lead up of a fight. You know, everybody's so different too. And I'm so fascinated by their skill set as well, the technical aspect of it too. But I only bring up and I only bring light to the story aspect of it because you become a fan of these fighters, these real life fighters. You become a fan and appreciate what they do for a living and appreciate their character. There's a couple things that maybe that they do that you respect them even more because maybe they're going through like a lot of adversity in the lead up of a fight, and maybe in their training camp they're dealing with a lot of injury, or they're dealing with a lot of just a lot of personal things in their lives, and then somehow they're able to overcome that and win the fight and still manage to prepare properly and still train even despite the challenges that comes across them. So, when I hear stuff like that or I hear stories like that, it makes me want to root for them more, and it makes me more invested into that fighter. And as I mentioned before, usually it just builds up and it builds up with the story as it gets closer to the fight date, and the climax is really at the fight itself. And it's like a big explosion at the time of the fight, and once the fight ends, it kind of ends there, but not all the time, because usually some of these fighters would fight again, and it my climax at the fight, at their first fight, it'll drop down, and then you could build off the prior history or the prior story that was made and build it up again to climax to another fight for another rematch. And so I bring up that example again because, again, those stories really allow me to connect with these fighters, even to the point where you know them so well, right? You know everything about them, that you become a fan of them, and you support them and root for them, and you develop a certain time of perspective, respect, or whatever emotions that you have about them because of the story that is told. And I bring up another example about people sharing stories with one another. When you're at a setting where, let's say, you just have a conversation with someone, you have a deep conversation, and you start talking about people's stories and their experiences. What I also like too is like interviews or like podcasts, extended podcasts where, people talk about their journey of, how they came to the place that they currently are. Maybe the journey of like a professional athlete, how they became a professional in the professional scene, and what it took for them to get to that point. You could really resonate with that person too. But I would also just bring up, like, when you're just having maybe a one-on-one conversation and you're just sharing each other's experiences. Again, it becomes an opportunity to develop a close bond, or a really good relationship where you could really understand the other person's perspective, to be in their shoes, and it allows you to bond with them, and it creates this opportunity where you could really build community, you could really build with one another rather than tear each other apart and have these assumptions about people, have certain perceptions about people that aren't really true. But if you're able to tell stories, it brings people together and it really connects people. So that being the third point, that's I think that's huge. Is that it connects people, it really brings people together, right? Um, that kind of goes along with the first point. I think the first point that I was trying to make is it does allow you to have dialogue with one another to connect, but it builds. But to go on to that point, it builds that bridge that is needed for us to really understand one another, especially if if you come from different cultural backgrounds. We all come from different types of backgrounds. We all have different cultural practices, like different types of social etiquette. But when you really understand like our stories and why we behave the way we do, you could understand other person's perspective a little bit more, and there could actually be a lot of similarities that you could derive from it when sharing those stories. And so I think stories are a great way for us to build bridges, to really connect with one another, to build relationships. I think it's huge, and a lot of times too, you gotta be vulnerable, and you gotta be willing to tell things about yourself for people to really, for other people to really open up to you, right? And that could be a whole nother episode where we could talk about vulnerability and disclosing certain types of information about ourselves. But at the end of the day, it's so important for us to tell their story, because I really do feel like it also just brings value to who we are as people, right? Um, we because we all have our own stories, right? That make us who we are. Um, Not every story is a happy one. Not all of them have a happy ending. Uh, there's a lot of tragic stories. There's a lot of, but they're real at the end of the day. And I appreciate a story that is authentic, that is real, that is not fabricated. Because I like stories that are true. Because to me, like, truth and telling something that's real, it's is what's gonna build like real relationships with one another, something that's authentic, a real connection with one another, and not just having like this bond on something that's a lie, right? We gravitate towards truth, and we gravitate towards a real story that conveys a real message. And so, yeah, I bring that up. I love stories. I love reading books. I love listening to interviews and podcasts, because it brings me it brings a different perspective about a certain person or their character. If we're talking about real life people, and it makes you appreciate a lot of times their success and their accolades too. It also makes me appreciate like they're just another human being, right? They're just people at the end of the day. They're You and me, we're not that much different, and we go through a lot of the same experiences. And when you hear what other people go through and how they were able to navigate towards something, it allows you to also learn something from it too, like those lessons that we talked about on one of our points. And so it's important, man. I think we should all tell our stories. And it seems to me that as I've been going through these podcasts, I've been sharing more and more a little bit about my own story. I wouldn't I'm not here to compare my story to everybody else's. I think everybody's story is unique in its own way, and it's valued in its own way as well. But I love hearing it. I love hearing other people's stories, and I just want to, I really want to hear what what they're all about, what they went through, because it will probably make me understand who they really are at their core, and gives me an opportunity to really connect with people. And so, yeah, if you got a story to tell, please do tell it. You could even tell me. I would love to hear it. And if you could tell it in a very creative way through shows and movies and books, then you have a real gift in that. And you should definitely use that gift in a way where maybe you could get your message across. You could get your points across through these stories that you create for the audience. And so that concludes this podcast episode. I really do hope you guys tell your stories if you are able to. I think every story is very important, and it's the best way for us to really bond and connect with one another and bring people together and build relationships if we share our stories with one another. So thank you guys so much. Please subscribe to this content if you haven't already. Drop a like for this video. Hit the notification button. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Peace.